The loggers came first. That is how Commander Reyes remembered it afterward. The way it always starts, not with a declaration, not with a transmission lighting up every military frequency on the planet, not with the slow blossomy shadow of a ship against the moon. It started with the loggers. 14 men from a Cascade timber operation who went into the mountains on a Thursday morning and were never heard from again. The company is a supervisor named Greer up the access road to find them. The rescue drone footage, Reyes would review 46 times in the following weeks, showed Greer's truck rolling to a stop in the clearing. It showed Greer stepping out, looking around, looking up at the tree line. It showed something in the branches. Then it showed Greer running. Then it showed nothing at all. The drone recorded another 11 seconds before whatever hit it ended the feed. Reyes got the case because nobody else wanted it. She was sheriff of Aldenmore County, a strip of forested high country in the northern Rockies, with a population of roughly 3,000 souls, a single main road, and the distinction of being the most remote county seat in the lower 48. Deputy was a young man named Cole Mark, who had transferred from Portland, under circumstances he described as a clean start, and she had not pressed. She had enough of her own history she wasn't eager to revisit. She had a son named Marcus who was 7, and he had a set of divorce papers signed 8 months ago, and she had a hollow place behind her sternum where the name Daniel used to live. Daniel being her older son, who had been 9 years old when she left him with her sister for a weekend deployment, and who had fallen from a second-story railing while nobody was watching, and who had not survived the hospital. Reyes had been 200 miles away when it happened. She had been doing her job. She never stopped doing her job because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant going to the place where Daniel was, and she was not ready for that place yet. She suspected she would never be ready. Aldenmore was quiet. That was why she had taken it. Quiet suited her. She was the one who drove up to the timber site after Greer's drone went dark. She brought Cole, brought his rifle and his nervous energy, and a thermos of bad coffee. They found the clearing just as the first snow of October started to fall. Truck was there. Greer was not. There was blood on the door handle, a single dark smear, like someone had grabbed it while their hand was already in. But the door was still closed and Greer's keys were still in the ignition. Cougar, Cole said, because he was still at the stage of his career where things needed to have names. Ray crouched down and looked at the ground. The snow was fresh enough to hold prints, and the prints in the snow were not from a cougar. They were hoof prints, roughly the size of her palm, arranged in pairs, bipedal. Whatever had made them had walked on 2 legs across the clearing, and then, as far as she could tell, directly up into the trees. Cougar, she said, not because she believed it, because the alternative required more of her than she had to spare that morning. She called it in as a possible animal attack, secured the site, and drove back down the mountain. That night she stood at Marcus's bedroom door and watched him sleep and felt the usual arithmetic of love and fear that every parent walks with, the constant low-grade awareness that the world is enormous and full of edges. She had felt it more acutely since Daniel. She had felt it so acutely that sometimes she struggled to breathe. She went to bed. She did not sleep well. The next morning, every household in Aldenmore woke to the same thing she had found in the timber clearing. Hoof prints, 2-legged. They circled the houses like something had walked around them slowly, measuring, deciding. They stopped at windows. They stood for a long time at certain doors. Earl Duggan, who was 81 and had farmed the same land his grandfather cleared, came to the station with his hat in his hands and told Reyes the tracks matched nothing in the old hunting guides. Nothing in the forestry department manuals, nothing in the indigenous oral histories he had read about the region. Old Shawnee stories, Earl said. My wife's grandmother was Shawnee. She talked about things that lived in the deep forest, things that had been there before people, things that moved when the trees were cut. He paused. She said they didn't like noise. Industry. She said when the trees started falling at scale, you'd start finding animals gone from the land first. Like a warning. Reyes thought about the logging operation. 14 men. What did she call them? Reyes asked. Earl looked out the window at the tree line. It was close enough to town that, on a clear day, you could almost read the shadows between the pines. She had a word for them, he said. I don't speak Shawnee. But she said they were old, older than any name we had for them. Cole spent the afternoon on his laptop cross-referencing the track dimensions with every known species in North America. Then, every known species in the world. Then, with the particular desperation of someone who cannot find the answer they need, with every known fossil record for hoofed bipedal organisms, he found a single fish, a coelacanth, that science had believed extinct for 70 million years, until someone hauled one up in a net off South Africa. That's a fish, Reyes said. The point is, Cole said, science is wrong about things. That's a fish, Cole. Science is wrong about things, Sheriff. She sent him home. She drove the perimeter of town and tried to think like an investigator, which required her to hold two contradictory positions at once, that she did not know what was happening, and that she'd figure it out. The footprints had come from the tree line to the north, which was the direction of the logging operation. They had circled every house in Aldenmore. They had not entered any of them. Not yet. That night, Marcus woke her at 2 in the morning. He came padding into her room in his socks, his face arranged in the careful blankness children use when they are trying very hard not to be scared. He told her something had walked past his window. She had already been half awake because she was always half awake now, sleeping with one ear cocked for things that shouldn't be in the house. Another inheritance from Daniel, from the impossible mathematics of a mother who hadn't been there. She got up. She checked Marcus's window, which was on the second floor. There were no marks on the exterior wall. But in the snow of the yard below, she could see the prints. They were close to the house, closer than last night. She put Marcus back to bed. She sat in the chair by his door, with her service weapon in her lap, and she watched him sleep. She thought about the logging road and the smear of blood on Greer's truck door, and the way the drone feed had simply ended. No dramatic last image, just signal, and then no signal, the way her phone had simply been a phone, and then the hospital's number on the screen, and then the rest of her life. She didn't sleep at all that night. In the morning, she ordered the hunting season suspended. The town did not take this well. Aldenmore's economy ran on the fall hunt, and on the timber that was now the source of whatever had come down from the mountains, struck several residents as a fine irony. Jim Calloway, who owned the sporting goods store on Main, came to tell her personally that she was overstepping. He was a big man, with a red face, and the particular righteousness of someone who has never been tested in a way that mattered. You have a missing logger, he said. You don't even have a body. I have four missing horses and tracks that no wildlife agency can identify, and 3 reports of people hearing things in their walls, Reyes said. And I have a county I intend to keep alive. You're doing this because of your kid, Calloway said. He said it with surgical precision, watching her face to see where it landed. Your boy. You've been jumpy since that happened, and now you're taking it out on the whole town's income. She held very still. She was good at that. 12 years of law enforcement had given her a very effective stillness. You can go now, she said. He went. Cole watched from his desk and said nothing, which was the right call. 3 hunters went into the forest anyway, because the order to stay out had no legal teeth, and Reyes could not be everywhere at once. Their names were Vic, Darrell, and a man everyone called Shorts because of a summer incident that had become local legend. They were gone for 2 hours before Shorts came back. He came out of the tree line at a dead run, coatless, missing 1 boot, his face the specific white of someone who has left a part of themselves. Behind in the forest, a part they will not be getting back. He was not injured. He simply could not speak. He sat in the station and drank coffee that went cold and looked at the wall, and eventually said, in a voice that had lost all of its texture, that it had been fast, that it had come down from the trees, that he had not seen all of it because he had been running. What he had seen was large and dark and wrong in the way that something is wrong when it does not correspond to any category your brain has ever prepared for. Vic and Darrell's bodies were found the next afternoon by a ranger team. They were in the treetops. They were very high up. Reyes stopped counting the hours she had slept. She stopped counting because the number was embarrassing. She drove to see Earl Duggan again. He was in his barn, doing the small, unnecessary work that old men do when they are frightened and need their hands occupied. She asked him to tell her everything his wife's grandmother had said. He told her. It took a long time. She took notes in her field book the way she always took notes. Abbreviated, precise, no editorializing, just the thing itself. The time she left the barn, the snow was falling again, and the sky was the color of old pewter, and the tree line to the north was very dark. Through evening she stood at the window of the station and watched the light fail over Aldenmoor and tried to understand what she was dealing with. The tracks suggested something bipedal with a stride length of roughly 6 feet. The damage to Vic and Daryl's bodies, per the ranger team's report, suggested something with exceptional upper body strength and a capacity for climbing that exceeded anything in the North American megafauna record. Cameras Earl had posted on his fence line the previous week showed, for exactly 1.7 seconds, a shape moving through the dark at the edge of his property. The image quality was poor, grainy, or exposed at the edges where the infrared had compensated for total darkness. But the shape was there. It walked on 2 legs. It was very tall. Its proportions were wrong. Cole leaned over her shoulder and looked at the still frame she had captured from the footage, quiet for a long time. "This is above our pay grade," he said finally. "It's my county," Ray said. "Sheriff, it's my county." She looked at the shape in the image. She thought about the prints circling the houses in the dark. She thought about Marcus at his window, careful face. "I'm not calling anyone until I know what I'm calling about." The storm came in that night. Not a dusting, a squall. A genuine blizzard, the kind the mountains threw at the valley every few years as a reminder of what winter actually was. It came fast, the way the serious ones do, and by 9 in the evening the road out of Aldenmoor was buried, and the power lines were swaying, and most of the town had driven out before the window closed. The ones who stayed did so because they were too old or too stubborn or because they had nowhere else to go. Race had Marcus and Cole, and Earl was in his farmhouse on the edge of town, and the Poplar family was in their bed and breakfast near the church, and that was roughly it. Maybe 30 people. A town that had shed itself like a skin. Reyes was on the phone with her sister, who had Marcus's overnight bag, and Marcus' favorite blanket, and Marcus's spare inhaler, when her son appeared in the kitchen doorway and said, with the exact same careful blankness as before, that something was at the back door. She ended the call. She drew her weapon. She moved through the kitchen with Cole behind her and got to the back hallway and heard it. A sound that was not any sound she had heard before, low and rhythmic, something between breathing and something that had never needed to breathe. She heard claws on wood. She heard the structure of her house make a small sound of protest. Then the lights went out. She moved by feel, by the map of her own house she had built in her head across the months she'd lived there. She got to Marcus. She got him to the interior bathroom, the one with no windows, and she pushed him inside and put Cole in with him and told Cole to hold the door no matter what. Cole was afraid, visible shaking kind, but he nodded. He was better than he knew. Most people were. She went back out into the dark. She stood in the hallway with her weapon raised and her breathing controlled, and she listened. The house was making sounds. Not just the normal sounds of a structure in a blizzard, the settling and complaining of wood under weather. Something else, something measured and deliberate. A circuit of sound, like whatever was outside was walking its perimeter. Like it was making sure she was in here, making sure of the shape of the building, the exits, the points of vulnerability. It was hunting, not recklessly, not the way a hungry animal hunts, opportunistic and quick. The way a mind hunts methodically and without hurry, with the patience of something that has never needed to hurry, because it has always been the largest thing in its world. And then she understood. She stood in her hallway in the dark, with her weapon in her hands, and she understood something that cracked her investigator's training open, like a shell, and left the raw thing inside exposed. She understood that all the animals that had fled before the thing arrived had not fled out of fear of the creature. They had fled out of knowledge. They were smarter than the humans. They had recognized the pattern, the systematic assessment, the circling, the patience, and they had run, because running was the only sensible response. And she understood, too, what the pattern was. Teen loggers gone, and their supervisor, the horses. The deer drained from the forest. The circling of every house. The creature, or creatures. She revised because she didn't know anymore if she was dealing with one or many, had been driven from its territory by the logging operation. It had not simply displaced. It was reconnoitering. It was assessing the human settlement as a problem to be solved, a thing that had invaded its ancient range and needed to be addressed. It was not a monster. It was a displaced intelligence that had decided, with the cold logic of something that had survived for a very long time in a forest that showed no mercy, that the humans were the problem. She did not find this comforting, but she found it useful. She spent the next 10 minutes doing something that Cole later said was either the bravest or the most reckless thing he had ever heard of. Though he used a word stronger than brave and a word considerably stronger than reckless, she moved through her house in the dark, room by room, making noise. Not alarmed noise, not frightened noise, deliberate, rhythmic noise. She knocked on walls, she moved furniture. She talked out loud in a normal voice, calm and even, the way she talked to Marcus when he was afraid. Low, purposeful tone that says, I am here, I am not going anywhere, and you are safe. She was not talking to Marcus, she was talking to it. Not words it could understand. Just presence. Just the signal that something was still here, was aware, was not going to go silent and give it the information it was looking for. She was refusing to act like prey. The circling stopped. There was a long silence. She stood in her kitchen with the wind hammering the windows and the dark complete around her, and she waited, weapon raised, 'cause she was not foolish enough to believe that confusion was victory. The sound came through the kitchen wall. A single impact, exploratory, the way you knock on a wall to find a stud, testing the structure. Then silence again, then the impact on the front door. Hard enough to shatter the frame. Hard enough to tell her that whatever was out there had decided patience was done. She moved to the front hallway. She planted her feet. She aimed at the door, and she thought of Daniel, because that was where she always ended up when things were worst. Not because it made her weaker, not anymore, but because it had left her with nothing left to lose that she was willing to lose quietly. She had already lost a child to her own absence. She was not losing another one while she was right here. The door held. She had good deadbolts. The impact came again and again. The frame began to develop opinions about its own structural integrity. She fired through the door. 3 rounds. Low center mass, where she estimated the height, because whatever was in the footage was taller than her door frame. She heard something. A sound between a scream and a sound a tree makes when it falls. Vast and involuntary and genuinely surprised. Then the weight went off the door. Then the porch's cracked under something going away fast. She stood in her hallway for 30 seconds and breathed. Then she went and got Marcus and Cole out of the bathroom. Are you hit? Cole said, looking at her. No. Is it dead? I don't know. I don't think so. She looked at her son. He was very quiet. His eyes were very large. Get your coat, she told him. We're going out? We're going to the church. She was already moving, pulling on her own coat, checking her remaining ammunition. The poplars are there with the other holdouts. Everybody in one building, one location. Better than scattered. Cole said, the church is 3 blocks. I know where the church is. In a blizzard. I know where the church is, Cole. They went out through the back. The snow was deep and still falling, and the wind was enough to make walking a deliberate act. She kept Marcus between herself and Cole, hand on his collar. The way you walk a child when speed matters more than comfort. The town was dark and silent and full of its own snow sounds. The creak and moan of structures under load, hiss of wind through the narrow street gaps. She watched the roof lines. She watched the edges of things. They made it to the church. Father Denning had the basement open and lanterns burning, and the remaining residents of Aldenmore were arranged in the pews or on the floor with the anxious stillness of people who are waiting for information about which way the world is going to go. Earl was there. The Poplars were there, both of them in their 70s, and displaying a remarkable composure that Reyes thought came from having already survived enough of life not to be shaken by its next offering. She told them what she knew. She did not speculate beyond what the evidence supported. She told them to go to the basement and to be quiet, and to stay away from the windows. She told Cole to go with them. Cole looked at her. You're not coming down. I'll be right above you. That's not the same as coming down. No, she agreed. It isn't. She had examined the church's layout during the walkover, the way she always scanned a space, reading exits and angles. The building was old stone, well built for the mountains. It had survived 100 winters with nothing worse than a cracked bell tower. The windows were high and narrow. The main doors were heavy timber. The basement had a single exterior egress, a bulkhead door on the north side, and she had Cole lock it from inside the moment they got everyone down. Then she went back up to the main floor and waited in the dark. She thought about the creature in the game camera footage, the proportions that were wrong. She thought about what Earl's wife's grandmother had said. Old. Older than any name we have for them. She thought about how a species could be ancient and unknown. How the deep forest could hold things that had learned, over thousands of years, to be invisible, to exist in the margins, to avoid humans the way humans avoided things that scared them, with a very effective wide berth that had served both sides well until the berth was taken away, until humans with chainsaws and machinery moved into the last wild places, and the margins got very thin. She thought about the shot she had fired through her own front door, the sound that had followed, the surprise in it. It had not expected her to fight. That was useful. In the deep structure of her chest, under the grief and the exhaustion and the fear that was there, always there, the background radiation of a mother who had already made the worst error she would ever make. Under all of that, something aligned, something that was very old in her. Older than Daniel, older than the divorce, older than law enforcement, something that went back to being a girl on a rough block, who learned very early that the cost of showing fear high was higher than the cost of not showing it. She was not prey. She heard them on the roof first, not one. The plural landed on her before she could name it, the sound too distributed, too multidirectional to come from a single point. Multiple impacts, overlapping, the stone church registering the weight above, like a drum head registering fingers. She stood very still. She counted. 5 points of contact, at least maybe more. Then the window on the east wall, the narrow one 8 feet up, filled with shadow. She aimed. She waited. She needed them inside if she was going to give the people in the basement any chance of knowing when to run. The window broke. Not the glass, which was already long gone. The stone of the frame itself, pulled outward from outside. The thing that came through the gap did so with the boneless efficiency of something that has learned to fold itself through spaces it shouldn't fit, and it was in the church and on the floor before Reyes had fully processed the movement. She shot it. 3 rounds, center mass. It made the falling tree sound again and went down. The doors went, both at once. What came through the doors was not one thing. She had stopped counting. She was backing toward the center of the church, firing, and she was accurate because she was always accurate. It was the one thing she had never had to apologize for. And the things that came through the doors were large and dark and wrong in every proportion, their legs too long and their movements too fluid. But they were not immune to bullets, and that mattered. They stopped at each hit. They slowed. They were not accustomed to things that fought back. One got to her. She felt it before she saw it. Impact at her left shoulder, not a full strike. Something like a graze. From something that would have killed her if she hadn't been already spinning away. Already bringing the weapon around. Already doing what she had learned to do in rooms full of things that wanted to hurt her, which was to make herself the least convenient problem in the room. She hit the floor. She came up firing. The one that had grazed her was between her and the wall. She shot it 4 times, and it went down hard and stayed down. Then it was quiet. She stood in the ruined nave of the church with her ears ringing, and her shoulder screaming, and her weapons still raised, and she counted the shapes on the floor. She moved through them one by one, with the discipline of someone who has been trained to confirm what her emotions are trying to turn into. Assumptions. They were down. They were not moving. The ones that had been on the roof were gone. Fled, she thought, or waiting. And she was not going to know which until she had time she did not currently have. She went to the basement door. She knocked 3 times, paused, twice more. The signal she had given Cole before she came back up, the bolt slid. Cole opened the door. He looked at her shoulder, and she watched him decide to process that later, which was the right call. "How many?" he said. "In here. 7. Maybe 8. I lost count, that's..." I know she moved past him to check Marcus first, because that was always first. Marcus was in the corner with Earl, and Earl had his arm around the boy and was telling him something that was keeping the panic at bay, some story or piece of knowledge that occupied the hands of the mind. She got to Marcus's level and looked at his face, and he looked at hers, and she said, "I'm here." "I know," Marcus said. Because he did know. She was always there now. That was the thing she had built out of Daniel's absence. The only thing she had been able to build. She was always here now, and she would be here until she couldn't be. And she would make sure that when she couldn't be, it would not be because she had looked away. She went back upstairs. Cole followed her. They stood at the broken doorway and looked out at Aldenmore in the blizzard, the darkness and the white, and the silence that had returned so completely it almost seemed like the noise of the past hour had been someone else's story. The snow was still falling. The roofline across the street was clear. But then she looked down. The prints. In the new snow, unblemished, covering even the prints she and Cole and Marcus had made on the way here. Fresh prints. Many of them. They surrounded the church in a ring that went from wall to wall, a perfect perimeter, and they faced inward. Every one of them aimed at the building, at the people inside. The ones from the forest had not all followed the others in. Some had stayed outside. Some had waited. She understood it then completely, the way you understand a case when the last piece drops. Not relief, not satisfaction, just the cold, clean click of the thing becoming itself. The ones that came in hadn't been stupid. They had been a test, a probe, and the ones outside had watched the outcome, had watched her fight, and they were doing now what they had done around the houses on that first night. Thinking, deciding. She stepped outside into the blizzard. Cole said her name behind her. The way you say a name, when you understand that saying it is all you can do. She walked to the center of the ring. She stood in the snow with her weapon holstered, hands at her sides. And she turned slowly, facing each shadow of the tree line, each dark margin between the buildings where something might be watching. She was soaked through. Shoulder was bad enough to make breathing a deliberate exercise. She was operating on no sleep and the residue of adrenaline, which is a particularly unpleasant resource to be running on. She stayed there for a long time. Nothing moved. The snow filled in the old prints and made new ones as she stood there. The town was silent. She could hear faintly the sound of the people in the basement. Not words, just the human sound of people being together in the dark, that murmuration that species makes when it is afraid but not alone. Then, from the treeline to the north, something happened that she would spend a long time afterward trying to describe. A sound, but not exactly a sound. Change in the quality of the dark. A withdrawal. Like when the tide goes out, and you can feel the water pulling back through the sand under your feet, the suction of it, the sense of mass relocating. They were leaving. She stood in the snow, and she breathed, and she watched the darkness at the edge of the forest. And she thought about what she had done inside the church, the 7 or 8 who would not be leaving. She felt the weight of it, the way you feel every weight like that. Not guilt, not satisfaction, but the simple heaviness of consequence. The understanding that you have moved a thing, and the thing will not go back to where it was. She had been a problem they hadn't expected. That mattered. Earl came to the church doorway and watched her from the steps. He didn't say anything. He was a man who understood when silence was the right offering. Eventually, she walked back inside. Cole had found a first aid kit in the church office and was ready to do something about her shoulder. She sat in a pew and let him, which was harder than anything else she had done that night, sitting still while someone else tended to her. She looked at the shapes on the floor, and she looked at the broken windows, and she listened to Marcus's voice from the basement, chattering now that the worst had passed, asking Earl some question about the mountains. She could not hear Earl's answer. She called the state police. She called the wildlife agency. She called the Department of the Interior. She called every number she had for every body that had jurisdiction over any piece of what had happened in Aldenmore County that night. And she told each one exactly what she had seen and exactly what she had done. And she used the word creature rather than monster ours because she was a law enforcement officer and precision mattered. And she told them to bring whatever they had. She did not say, "Come immediately, this is an emergency." Not because it wasn't, but because the prints outside were going north. Back toward the logging territory, back toward the deep forest, back toward whatever margin was left to them. She didn't know if they'd stay there. She didn't know if they'd come back when the snow was gone. She didn't know. And she had stopped trying to know things for which she had no data. What she knew was that the church was standing and the people in the basement were alive. And her son was 7 years old. And already asking questions. Again, which was the only measure of all right that she had ever really trusted. Cole finished with her shoulder. He sat down in the pew next to her, looking out at the nave, at the wreckage of the doors, at the snow drifting in through the broken frame. 14 loggers, he said. Yeah, Greer. Yeah, Vic and Daryl. Cole. He was quiet for a moment then. We should get a biologist, a real one. Someone who can look at what's here. He glanced at the shapes on the floor. Study them. Figure out what they actually are. Yes, she said. Because if they're this far south, yes. Logging pushed them this far out of their range. Cole. She looked at him, I know. He nodded. He understood what she wasn't saying, which was the same thing she was always not quite saying. That the cost of the margin had been coming due for a long time, and people like Greer and Vic and Daryl, and 14 men, whose names she was going to read in every morning report for the rest of her career had paid it. And the only question now was what you did with the debt. Whether you understood it, whether it changed anything about how you moved through the world. Dawn came eventually, the way it always does, without ceremony, the dark going gray and then less gray, and then the particular hard white of a mountain morning after a storm. The snow had stopped. The sky was a color she had no name for, somewhere between iron and silver, and the town of Aldenmore lay quiet under its white cover. Unmarked now, prints filled in. Everything smoothed to a surface that held no record of the night. She took Marcus outside when the light was good enough. She held his hand and they walked in the new snow, through the ruin of her county seat. Past the broken doors and the fence post that something had knocked clean out of the frozen ground. Past Earl Duggan's truck, where he had parked it the night before. Marcus walked beside her and looked at everything, with the tremendous attentive calm of a child who has been through something and has not yet decided what it means. He found the first print. He crouched down and looked at it, and then looked up at her. She crouched next to him. The print was at the very edge of the tree line, a single impression in the undisturbed snow between the last building and the first trees. It faced outward, away from town. They looked at it for a long time. It was standing here, Marcus said. Yes, watching, probably. He thought about this with the gravity of a 7-year-old working a problem. Then he asked, "Is it going to come back?" She looked at the print. She looked at the tree line. She thought about the sound of the darkness pulling back, the tide, withdrawal of it. And she thought about Earl's wife's grandmother and old stories, and the coelacanth in its impossible depth, persisting through the catastrophes of time, because persistence is what life does when nothing else is available. "I don't know," she said, because she didn't. And she was done lying about the things she didn't know. Marcus nodded. He reached up and took her hand again. They stood at the edge of the forest, in the new silence of a morning that had followed the worst night Aldenmore would ever have, and the trees were very still. And the light moved through them the way light moves through things that are very old and have seen many things, and are, on balance, still here. She stood there with her son until the cold made it impractical. Then she walked him back to the church, where the coffee Cole had made was hot and bad and exactly right.